As our commitment to the truth and reconciliation promise and process, we begin this event by acknowledging that Muskoka is a traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Chippewa and Ojibwe peoples and the Algonquin. We also recognize the Wattamohawks who relocated to Muskoka in 1881. The Williams Treaty of 1923 and the J. Collins Land Purchase of 1785 cover the territory we live in. We recognize the historic and present contributions to our province and country of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. My name is Sarah McNeil, and I am an Information and Digital Services Librarian at the Bracebridge Public Library. On behalf of the Muskoka's public libraries, I would like to welcome all of you to this event. I am very, very excited because today we have internationally best-selling author Linwood Barclay with us. He has written 20 thrillers for adults. He has written nonfiction, children's books, screenplays, short stories. Many of you know him from his career in newspapers. That's one thing that I heard when I said that we were having Linwood Barclay. Oh, that guy who wrote the humor column in the paper? Yes, that guy. And luckily for us, he retired and now he writes full-time with his books and novels. So that is wonderful. Welcome, Linwood.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yes, I wish we could have you in Muskoka, but I know that you're somewhere nice. You got a good tree.
No, I'm there in spirit, if not in person. But it's but I'm glad to be able to join you. I'm in Prince Edward County tonight, so a little ways away, but but it's nice to be here.
Still a gorgeous place. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your new book, Find You First?
Sure. So, Find You First is a thriller. It's about a fellow named Miles who is a sort of tech giant, computer guy who's made millions in tech, designing apps and so forth. And he's discovered that the one thing money cannot buy is time. He has learned from his doctor that he has a terminal illness. And they say, well, at least it's a good thing you never had kids, because this is something that passes on to the next generation about 50% of the time. Because they have never been married, you don't have kids. What they don't know is that some 2 decades ago, Miles was a sperm donor. And so there could be several grown children out there. And after a lot of soul searching, because Miles has, for most of the time, been a pretty self-centered guy, he thinks he'd like to try to find these individuals, these children of his, and first of all, let them know that they should get themselves checked. They might have this condition, but also he has all this wealth. Who's he going to leave it to? And he thinks maybe this would be the thing to do. And so once Miles embarks on this quest to find all of these individuals, they start vanishing one by one. Not just not necessarily perhaps murdered, but just gone, all trace of them gone. And that, and what's behind us? I mean, as he's embarks on this, is one of these potential heirs getting rid of the rest of them so that they'll inherit more money, or is there something even darker and even more sinister going on? And that is our kind of pitch for Find You First.
Yeah. There's been a lot of interesting stories in the news about people uncovering lost connections or discovering new family members. Was there any story in particular that kind of inspired you to write this?
Well, there was one thing that had struck me was there was a kind of photo feature in the New York Times magazine a couple of years ago, maybe longer ago than that. And it was a photo essay of someone who had gone around the country and had found half siblings. They were all from the same sperm donor, and so there were these pictures of all these different young people from across the country in it, and it was a very great human interest kind of story. And of course, being a thriller writer, I look at that and I think, well, how could that go horribly wrong? And of course, and this is the kind of a thriller that I couldn't have written this thriller 10 years ago or 15 years ago, because now we live in a time where you can put on the TV at night and there'll be an ad for Ancestry.com or 23andMe, send us a saliva sample and we'll tell you everything about your DNA makeup, and we may even be able to connect you with relatives that you did not know you had. And so, those seem like elements that I thought I can do something with that. And also, in fact, there is a parallel story running through the book that we're kind of waiting for Miles's story, our tech guy, and this other story to come to an intersection. But this other one is about a character in New York who some people seem to think might be very loosely based on Jeffrey Epstein, and they might be right. And so we have to think, well, what on earth does this story have to do with this story? And I'm hoping part of the fun people find reading it is finding out when are these two stories going to collide? When are they going to intersect?
I noticed that a lot about your books is that there's always lots going on, and they come together in so much interesting in different ways and surprising ways too. I think we have a poll for people, and we're going to launch it just to ask if people have taken a DNA test, and I'm going to ask you the same question. Have you taken one of these tests?
I did, and I don't know, perhaps I'm just really, maybe there's things I really don't want to know about my family's background, but so I certainly looked upon these developments as opportunity for storytelling, but I didn't take the test myself. At one point I sort of had thought about it, and then my brother had gone ahead and done it. And you know how there's this sort of old joke about how if you're not feeling well, you find a friend who's got the same symptoms, and you get him to go to the doctor. And if the doctor says, you've got 3 weeks to live, then you can start worrying. But he did the test, and he didn't sort of I thought, well, if he's getting it done, ours is going to be the same makeup. And he didn't find anything too particularly alarming or startling. So I haven't had it done. But I can understand why a great many people do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's lots of interesting things and lots of interesting questions and ethical questions that come up. So if his DNA is in there and people know that he's your brother, then just don't do any crimes, right?
That's right.
With kind of, you mentioned about Miles has this kind of genetic disease, and he has this money, and there's a lot of stuff about legacy in this book, whether it's, like I said, with health or money, or even kind of behaviors and questions about characteristics and things like that. Is legacy something that you were thinking of specifically when you're writing the book, or is it just a result of talking about the DNA stuff?
Are you talking about the characters in the book and their legacies and what they were thinking about? Is that what you're saying? I think that our particularly nasty character, the one who's off in Manhattan, is very much thinking about his legacy, because he's a very vain, very self-consumed kind of individual. And I'd say more than any other, that's his concern. One of the characters that I most love in this book is a young woman named Chloe, who is an aspiring documentarian and is she herself has taken one of these kind of 23andMe tests, although in the book I call it whatsmystory.com. And she's the first one that Miles, when he goes looking for these potential heirs, these offspring of his, does find her right away. And then it's the two of them that go looking for all of the others, who then just start vanishing one by one. But Chloe is a very interesting character because she's not an egotistical kind of individual. She's very straightforward, she's very confident. But those kinds of questions about legacy and so forth, like she doesn't care. And she has very interesting philosophies about life. I mean, it's Miles who's saying, well, if you had this condition, wouldn't you want to know? And she's like, well, why would I want to know? Why do I need to know? If I find out, through you that there's something that's going to develop in 15 years, well, then now I have 15 years I can worry about it. And, I could spend the next 15 years concerned in how I'm going to do this, but tomorrow I could step in front of a bus. So why do I need to know this? And she's a great foil, I think, for Miles, because she's a very straightforward thinker and she challenges him on a lot of things.
I thought Chloe was a great character.
Yeah. Yeah, I like
She
her.
was definitely a really good contrast to what was happening. You mentioned the connection with Jeffrey Epstein, and there's a ton of other events that I picked out from newspaper headlines and kind of pop culture that were going on. And you wrote for the newspaper for a long time. Do you think that's influenced the way either that you're writing, or the way that or has your writing influenced the way that you read the news? Are you always kind of scouring for the next story?
Well, newspapers have had an immense impact on how I do what I do. I mean, I started working at the Peterborough Examiner when I was 22. And I guess when I was 26, 25, somewhere in there, I guess it was, I landed a job at the Toronto Star in 1981. And I spent 27 years working at a daily newspaper, the biggest paper in the country. And I think I gained a couple things from that. One is, of course, when you work in a newspaper and every day you're dealing with something new, working in a newspaper is kind of a crash course in the world. You know, it's just one day you're working, you're now, first of all, I should back up and just say that I was hired as an editor. I'd been a reporter for 4 years, but when I got to the Star, I applied as a reporter, and they said, well, what we really need are editors. Do you have a lot of editing experience? And I said, sure, which, you know, I didn't, but I was quite good at it. But, but even as an editor, you've got stories crossing your desk and you're, you know, signing reporters and so forth. And one day it's the Queen's visit, and the next day it's an airplane crash. The next day it's a city council meeting. So you kind of soak up all this information that you just have, this huge kind of repository of data that when you start to write a book, you think, well, I kind of know a little about this or about that. And anything I don't know, I can check. But the other impact that newspapers had for me is that deadlines mean everything, and that more than anything else, writing is a job. You know, I think a lot of people have a very sort of romantic notion about what it is like to be a writer, you know, and waiting for the muse to strike and all that kind of stuff. But to me, writing is a job. When I'm in the thick of writing a novel, I go up to my study in the morning and I go to work. And the goal is to get 2,000 words done. Some days I get a little less than that. Other days I go past that. And it's a job. I mean, if you work in a newspaper and you have, and like I had a column for 14 years after I'd been all this stint as an editor, I did get a column at the Star. And if you call the editor and you say, you know, I just wasn't feeling it today. It just didn't strike me to do one. And they could say, well, you know, maybe you should go work at another paper because you're no good, you're no help, you're no value to us. So writing is a job. And so, you know, like the most common question sometimes from people is, well, do you get writer's block kind of thing? And I always love that question because I think, well, do you get, you know, accountant's block? Do you get teacher's block? Do you get plumber's block? And I just think that art writers so special and precious that we have a condition to describe just not getting around to work, you know? And so so I think that is the biggest thing that working 30 years in newspapers taught me, is that writing's a job. You sit down in the chair in the morning and you go to work.
Mm. Yeah, we have a pretty strong as amateur writing group in Muskoka. We have lots of different writing groups and writing events happening, and they always have questions about the writing process. So I know they will really appreciate that. I have another question about that, because everyone knows who's read your books that there are a lot of twists and turns and surprises for the reader. When you're writing, do you have a clear idea? Do you plan them out, or are things kind of a surprise?
Well, you know, they describe in this, those of us who write crime fiction and so forth, for every crime writer I know, it's a different, they go at it a different way. You know, like Ian Rankin has become a friend over the years. Ian just has a kind of an idea for an opening, and he just starts writing. And he says he writes the book to find out what happened. And then you take someone like Michael Connolly, who I think sort of plots out every chapter before he begins and knows where he's going to end up right at the very beginning, you know. And so and we call those, there's plotters and pantsers, you know, pantsers fly by the seat of your pants. And I sort of fall kind of in the middle. So, but when I start writing, I want to know the big picture. I want my hook at the beginning that draws you in, but I want to know all the circumstances that came into effect that brought us to that moment at the beginning. And I want to know where I want to end up. And I have it, and I know who's done what. I kind of know the underlying issues and the mechanics of the book. What I don't know is what's going to happen in that big mushy middle. I know the beginning, I know kind of where I want to end up, but it's kind of like, you know, if you get in a car in New York and you want to drive to Los Angeles, you know where you're going to end up, but there are 100 ways to get there. So once I start writing, it's not until I start writing that I see the opportunities that exist. And as for the twists, you know, I have a sense of, you know, if I have some idea, if you know what the story is and you know what's going to happen and who's done what, you know, as you write, how you can misdirect. You can do sort of little sleights of hand. I can steer the reader in this direction so they don't look at what's going on over here. And those kind of evolve and turn into twists. And twists, I also think, are a kind of a sense, it's like telling a joke. It's often in the timing. Now I can show you an example. So here's just 2 pages of your book. I love this white space here and this chapter heading here. Now, to me, I grew up addicted to television as a kid in the 60s. To me, this is your commercial break. And right here is where something is supposed to happen that makes you go, oh my gosh. So you have to go on to here. But it's this white space that has this to me has this kind of graphic effect that if you drop a twist here, it has, you know, or a bit of information that's really important. It has great impact and way more impact than as if you dropped it right here. And just in the middle of everything else. To me, a twist never goes here. A twist always goes here. And so it has that kind of effect. I mean, like I'm saying, I was just obsessed watching television as a kid in my teens and had all these favorite shows. And I always felt like chapter breaks are commercial breaks. You give us a reader some kind of a twist or something at the end of a chapter, so they think, I maybe just one more chapter. I have to do another one.
I think I noticed that with your book because, I mean, it starts with something big and exciting, and then it's like, oh, and then, you know, 3 weeks earlier, 2 weeks earlier in the backstory.
Yeah, that's right. And I always feel too, because if you have several things going on, like you've got what's happening with Miles, you have what's happening with one of the potential heirs, you have something that's going on with our Epstein type character. And if you start layering in the chapters with different things, if you end this chapter with a cliffhanger or a twist, and then the next chapter takes us to a different character, I think there's this sense that I have to keep reading because I got to get to a chapter that takes me back to that storyline. But if you keep ending all the alternate storylines with sort of mini twists or cliffhangers, then the book, I would hope, has this sort of sense of momentum going on that you just have to keep going.
Yeah. I think I read it in 2 sittings, so it was I definitely had to keep reading and reading. You mentioned a little bit because you kind of play with your audience a little bit, and there's definitely some playfulness and there's some humor in your books, and I read some of your earlier ones as kind of a lead up to this, and sometimes there's a little bit of I don't want to say ridiculousness, but there's some a little bit of silliness maybe. And you wrote a humor column. What got you into writing humor?
Well, I just didn't want to do the research. It was just easier to just make up funny stuff so that I didn't have to, it was a lot easier than having to actually go out and get the actual quotes and so forth. That's part of it. I don't know. I always liked writing satire. I wrote humor when I was in high school and university. Way back when I worked at a community newspaper, like a smaller paper in Oakville, I wrote a humor column for them. And I just like, I like satirical writing. I always thought when I always called my column at the Star, I did 3 a week, I always called it an alleged humor column, because if you write a really bad sports column, it's still obviously a sports column. But if you write a really bad humor column and nobody laughs at it, it really wasn't a humor column. So I always felt that I had to qualify it, because writing a newspaper writing satire in a newspaper always presents certain risk, because unless there's a big label that says humor or satire or whatever, there's always going to be some reader who thinks it's true, no matter how ridiculous it is. I mean, my favorite example is years ago, when there used to be this big Russian satellite orbiting Earth, and it was decaying, it was falling apart. I wrote a tongue-in-cheek piece one time of things to do with your kids on the March break. And I said, why not send them to Mir Space Station Camp, the Russian satellite? But if you do, dress your kids very warmly, because it's warm in space, and send them with lots of rolls of duct tape, because there's holes in the hull, the whole thing's falling apart. And the next day after the column ran, I swear, a guy phoned in the paper and he said, you didn't put in a phone number. Now, he said, my kid would love to do that. And I'm thinking, first of all, I'd love to be that kid knowing that dad wants to send me into orbit. But if you have to explain that that's satire, I don't know. But I always liked writing humor. So when I started writing crime novels, the first 4 novels that I did were about a character named Zach Walker. And these were out and out comic thrillers. They were meant to be funny. And so the situations that Zach would find himself in were quite outrageous. And so I did the 4 of those funnier ones, but I kind of changed direction a bit with my 5th novel, which was a book called No Time for Goodbye, and which was a darker thriller. But I think there's light moments, funnier moments in all the books, but I think it generally comes out of sort of dialogue and repartee between people, and which it's not meant to be hilarious. It's just meant to be like, this is how people talk and do sort of quips and back and forth with each other.
There's definitely some dry humor in there too between the characters. I think it's a good mix in with the kind of the thriller genre, because if it's too serious, then it just gets a little bit.
Well, you kind of have to walk a fine line, because if you're writing a thriller, it's okay once in a while if something funny happens that breaks the tension briefly. But if it breaks it completely and the thriller loses its edge, then you've kind of gone too far. And, some of my earlier standalone thrillers that weren't part of those Zach ones, there would be moments sometimes where I would play a scene a little too broadly, and my agent or editor would say, rein that in a bit. This went a little too far.
Mm-hmm. So Find You First is a standalone book, which is great. If people are kind of reading you for the first time, they don't have to worry about catching up on backstory or anything like that. But do you have any preference between writing standalone novels or a series?
Well, there's good and bad about each. When I wrote the 4 Zach Walker novels, what's great about doing a series is sort of half your work is done before you begin. You've got your setting, you've got your characters, you know how everybody bounces off of one another. So all you have to do this time is think of, well, what adventure will they have this time? So that's great. The downside is you can't kill off your main character if you're running a series. You have to play by a certain number of rules as to how far things can go and what they can do and what they can't. So a standalone thriller, yes, you have sort of more work at the beginning, because you have to build everything. You've got to decide where it is, you've got to introduce all of your characters, but you can do anything you want to them. I did the 4 Zach Walker novels, and then I did a trilogy, which was there they are on the shelf here. There was Broken Promise, Far From True, and The 23, which I called my Promise Falls trilogy, and then a book called Parting Shot, which I call book 4 of the trilogy, which shows that my math skills are not great. But so I did those. Those were all sort of all connected, or at least the first 3 were all connected. So that was kind of a series. But everything since then, all the novels since the Promise Falls books, which would be A Noise Downstairs and Elevator Pitch, and now Far From True, have all been complete standalones.
Mhm. I realized that when you were, I was reading, or I was listening to the audiobook version. I was listening to the e-audiobook, which I find e-versions of books can be a little bit tricky because it's not like a book where you can say, oh, like I'm halfway through or I'm almost to the end. And I was listening to A Noise Downstairs, and I thought it was wrapping up, and I was about half, but then I looked and I was only at like 52%. I'm like, oh, there's more. That's great. That was, it was lots of fun. Are you working on anything now? Do you have anything coming up?
Oh yeah, well, first of all, I'm pretty much always working on something that's at some stage, because I am, last year, 2020 was the exception. 2020 was the first year since 2004 where I didn't have a new book out in the calendar year. Part of that was pandemic. Part of it was we didn't want to bring a book out in the fall because we'd have to fight the US election for attention and so forth. But generally, I'm on a book a year contract. So I'm either plotting one or proofing pages for another, or in the thick of writing one, and so forth. So I've already delivered the book that would come out in 2022, and and then done work on a second draft. So it's pretty much together. And also there's another book. I'm actually gonna have two books out next year. The other one, depending on the markets, it might be an ebook in the US, it might be a print book here, it might be print in the UK. We're not quite sure. It's kind of an extra. And I wrote it like 3 years ago, but we've been trying to figure out what to do with it or how to handle it, because it's different than what I typically do. It's more like a Michael Crichton kind of a thriller. It's, in fact, I describe it as think Jurassic Park, but instead of dinosaurs, it's self-driving cars. And you have a Martha's Vineyard island community where they're running a test of every car on the island is a self-driving car. All the residents agree to surrender their regular cars to the mainland, and they're going to run this grand test of these cars, because if all the cars on the road are self-driving, they communicate with each other. They know that I won't pull in front of you, or else. Then a virus gets introduced in the system, and all the cars essentially become homicidal. It's like an island with 1,000 Christines on it. And so that's the extra that's be coming out next year at some point, I think. And we have a title which is Look Both Ways. So there'll be those. So I'm working on that. I'm also working on another draft of a screenplay that's an adaptation of my novel Fear the Worst, which I'm writing for, which Jason Priestley wants to star in and produce. And so I've been working with him and a producer and so forth on trying to pull that together. So we'll see if that happens. And I've also just now started plotting the actual novel that I would have to start writing in September, October. So I have some things to do. And I have all these single-spaced, huge amount of these little notes, which are all about the self-driving car book and my editor's notes from the UK. So I have stuff to do.
When you say writing's a job, you mean?
It's a job. It really is a job. But the thing is, it's a job that I love to do. And it's possible that I'm simply not qualified to do anything else. But it is a privilege, I think, and a treat to be able to make your living doing what you wanted to do. I mean, I was writing stories starting around grade 5 or 6. And I was writing novels in my later teens and into my 20s, and thankfully none of those were published. But and so I've always been writing. So it's all I ever wanted to do, pretty much. And although my mother would have loved me to stay and run our trailer park and cottage resort in the Kawarthas, but I didn't do that.
Well, that's too bad, because although I work in Muskoka, I live in the Kawarthas. So you've been writing for a long time. Have you always known that it was going to be thrillers that you would find yourself writing, or Did you ever try?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have done, you know, when I was growing up, I was reading Agatha Christie and Rex Soutzner Wolfe novels. And then in my teens, I discovered Ross MacDonald's Lou Archer novels. So I was always felt it was sort of crime fiction. But when I have departed from it, it's generally been humor or political humor or so. I mean, here we go. What have we got here? Like, I did a book, a small book that came out over a year ago called just a little something here called Ford Abomination, which is a not entirely loving tribute to our current premier, but it does have cartoons and so forth. So every once in a while I'll do a little departure and I'll like do some humor or whatever. And I did a memoir called Last Resort, gosh, 21 years ago. But I like writing crime fiction. I like writing because there's something about, I need plot. I like plot. I like having a strong narrative of, you know, basically the skeleton that I can hang everything else off of. And so I think more than most genres, crime fiction is very, very much dependent on solid plotting, and everything has to mean something. Everything has to have there has to be a reason for everything that's there. And so it was the kind of thing I was always drawn to.
Mhm. I will remind people that we do have the Q&A feature. If you have questions for the author, we're going to be starting those soon. And we did ask a poll earlier about DNA testing,
Yes.
and 17% of you said yes, you've done one of the mail-in DNA tests. 29% said no, but I'm considering it, and 54% said no way. So we have.
You know what? See, if you find out all these people, then it's just more Christmas cards you got to do. You know, you have to look at it that way.
It's true. It's true, but I mean, you never know who you're going to end up with. So there's some.
Exactly.
Read the book and find out. It has some really fun things about family and who's your family and making family. So, yeah, if you're looking for a fun summer book, we did have a question about someone about the libraries, because we are selling the books. Can you just email us to order it? Absolutely. So if you want your own copy of the book, you can just email or phone your library tonight or tomorrow morning. We have some questions rolling in now. Walker asks, do you dream about bad guys coming after you?
Well, not quite, although I have to say, almost all of my dreams are what I categorize as frustration dreams. And it's the kind where you find out you have to do a speaking engagement at one of the hotels up by the airport, and you're supposed to be there at 6, and you realize it's 5 o'clock and you didn't know about it, and you can't get the speech to print out, and you're trying to phone them to tell them you'll be late. But every time you try to enter the number, you do it wrong. So I mean, I have dreams like that just about every single night. And every once in a while, my wife has to wake me up because I'm just doing all kinds of nutty things, you know, just sort of whatever. So bad guys, not necessarily, but dreams of angst every night.
Oh no. All right, we have an anonymous question about how do you choose your titles for your books?
Titles are an interesting process because often there can be a lot of wrangling involved in them because, first of all, my books are, you know, I have a UK publisher, I have a US, Canadian, all this sort of thing. So, you know, my American publisher may think, well, we've got the perfect title. And then we find out that in the UK, they had a book that came out last year that had that title. So we have to start again. And so it's, or we may come up with a title that is kind of a catchy phrase, but nobody knows it in America, but it's a good phrase in the UK. So you really spend a lot of time, first of all, just being able to agree on one. Then it's how do you capture the essence of a title in 3 or 4 words? And that's also a challenge, something that has kind of a nice beat to it. And a lot of my titles we've done, looking at the you know, a lot of them are we've done a lot of 3-word titles that, like Never Look Away, Fear the Worst, Find You First, Looking at the Shelf, Far From True. Some are different, some are like the elevator pitch, but it's really tricky, and I would say probably half the titles are mine, and the other are something that my agent thought up or somebody else did, one of the editors did, came up with something. When we were struggling with this idea for Find You First, I finally came up with a title that was, I think, Don't Let Him Find You First. And they said, oh, we like that, but let's chop it in half because it's too long. But with that Find You First, they thought that works. And in the UK edition, like in this one, it's just Find You First. In the UK, they have some lead-in words, which are, one will change your life, one will end it, who will, and then ... and leads into Find You First. But it can be a grueling process. And just the book about the autonomous cars that I just mentioned to you, I've been spending ages trying to think of a title for that. And the other night I was just watching TV and I just thought, look both ways, because that's what we do when we're crossing the street. And this is a book about homicidal vehicles just tearing all over the place. And it was the fastest we ever all decided on a title. Sent the idea to my New York editor and in London and so forth. And they all went, that's it. So, but sometimes, writing those 3 words can take longer than doing 12 chapters.
Mm-hmm. No, we understand. I mean, people ask for books all the time, and occasionally we give them the right title, but the wrong author. So
Yeah.
The struggle is real. We have someone who asked, what is the process for one of your books to be made into a screenplay?
Well, and that depends in part on whether I'm the one who writes a screenplay or somebody else does. The first step is generally some producer, somebody will read your book and get wind of it, and the first thing they want to do is they want to option it. And optioning, you're the perfect one to give this example to. I call optioning is like reserving a book at the library that you may or may not ever pick up. And so someone will say, well, we want to make Find You First into a movie. So they option it. We draw up a deal and they offer a modest sum of money. And that means that for the next 18 months, no one else can make a movie out of this book except for them. And then within those 18 months, they think, well, let's try to find someone to write a screenplay for it. Let's see if we can line up actors who'd be interested in doing it. Let's look for a director. And during those 18 months, and look for money. And if in those 18 months they can pull that together, then, like I say, if they're going to pay this much money to make your book into a movie, this is how much you get when they option it. And then the first day of shooting, you get the rest. So that's kind of the process. But Hollywood and elsewhere option just scads of books in the hopes that maybe they'd make a movie out of it, and then never do. So I've had many options over the years. Back in about 8-9 years ago, I did a book called Trust Your Eyes that sparked a bidding war between Warner Brothers and Universal, and Warner Brothers finally got it. And it was going to be directed by Todd Phillips, who directed Joker. And they renewed the option and they wrote 3 drafts of a screenplay and all this stuff happened. And then, like so often happens, then it just died. And about 6 years ago, that same book, I was asked by a producer and a director named Martin Campbell, who directed Casino Royale, the Bond movie, among other things. They wanted to make a 6-part series out of that book, and they wanted me to write all 6 episodes. So we got flown to London. We met at ITV, the TV network. We did all this sort of stuff. And I spent the next 6 months writing 12 drafts of episode 1. And then finally ITV said, nah, I don't think we'll do it. So the things that have been made, in France, they made a 6-part series out of my novel, The Accident, called Lexident. And it's on Acorn TV. I think it's on iTunes. And we went over for part of the shoot. They did a really nice job of it. I mean, yes, all the names are changed and it's in France and so forth, but they did a great job of it. And then a few years ago, I wrote an adaptation of my own novel, Never Saw It Coming, which we ended up getting shot in Ontario. It was shot in Sudbury with Emily Hampshire from Schitt's Creek and Eric Roberts. That got made. And it's if you want to see it, it's on Prime right now. And so, but you know, I spent the better part of 3 years working on a possible series on the Promise Falls books, and that finally died. So, as my agent in LA said, he said, it's a miracle that anything ever gets made, which is my experience. But you know what? I'm working away on another draft of this screenplay for Fear the Worst that Jason Priestley wants to do. So fingers crossed on that one.
Fingers definitely crossed. That seems like a lot of work for a little, just a few things that
You
actually.
know, when I was 15, 16 years old, all I wanted to do was write for television. And there was not a huge demand for that in Fenelon Falls, where I went to high school. But that's all I wanted to do. And now that I'm dipping my toe into that, have an opportunity to do it, it's not as much fun as I dreamed it would be, because when you write a novel, you work with an editor or two and you craft it together and it comes out. When you work on screenplays and, you know, scripts for TV and so forth, you use draft after draft after draft, and it's an endless number of people weigh in with opinion and what they think it should be. And so it's a whole different kind of a process. And I think it might demand someone with more patience than I have.
Oh no. Tracy had a question. She said, you mentioned loving TV growing up. Do you have any favorite series that you watch or stream?
Now, you know what? Last night we watched Halston, the Netflix piece on Halston with Ewan McGregor, which was fantastic. If Ewan McGregor has done anything better than that, I can't remember what it was. Last week, Netflix dropped this third season of The Kaminsky Method, 6 episodes, and we watched all of them in one sitting. We finished watching Mayor of Easttown, which was terrific. And then at various points through the pandemic, we just sort of like, what can we watch now to kill time? And so we rewatched all of Lost, which was a show that I thought was brilliant. And then our son said that he was a huge fan of the other J.J. Abrams series called Fringe. And we thought, okay, we'll give it a try. And we watched all 100 hours of Fringe, except for one that was kind of a dream episode and we skipped it. But so when you find something that's good, we just jump in. And there's a few things that are coming that we can't wait to see. Lisey's Story, based on Stephen King's novel of the same name, and with all of the episodes written by him, debuts tomorrow on Apple TV. So I'm very curious to see that. Season 7 of Bosch is coming back later in June. Ted Lasso comes back in July. So when something really, really good comes along. And here's the thing. I think as novelists, that's our competition. Some of the best television that has ever been made is being made right now, and you can consume it like a book. You don't have to wait a week for the next chapter. You can just start and go right through it. And so whatever we write or whatever I write, I feel I've got to write something that will make you, at least for a while, turn off Netflix or Prime Video, or just get off your stupid phone and read a book. And you know, I was at a conference of crime writers a few years ago, and we're all sitting around in a circle. We were all talking about what shows we were watching, and then it suddenly hit us that none of us were asking, "What book have you read?" That scared us.
Yeah, that's usually a popular question. I have that. It's my very last question on my sheet that I didn't get to.
Which was that?
I have it here. We have a question, or kind of a comment from Brad, which kind of goes with that, I think, because he asked, how many people have sworn off elevators since reading Elevator? He's very cautiously steps across the threshold now. So even if they're not movies, I think they're still affecting people.
Well, you know, I did a book, here it is over here, where is it now? I did a book a couple years ago called, well, this was the promotion called Elevator Pitch, which was about a guy who was a kind of a different kind of serial killer who was killing off people in New York by sabotaging elevators. And I had no idea that, you know, when I had the idea for that, I had no idea how many phobias that it tapped into, because you have so many people hate elevators. They hate this claustrophobia, the loss of control, being fear of heights, being jammed in with other people. All these phobias kind of intersected when you stepped into an elevator. And I thought, well, that's great, because I thought when I wrote elevator pitch, I thought I want to do for elevators what Psycho did for showers. But I think it was a public service, because now people are taking the stairs and they're in much better shape.
Definitely, definitely. Um, Simon Halley writes or asks, most, if not all of your novels are set in the United States, where you were born, but now you live in Canada. So do you think that you would have been as successfully internationally if you had set them in Canada?
I don't know. That's a good question. I get it a lot, and of course, it's sort of a tender spot, I think, with some Canadians. I mean, nobody would ask, why did you set your book in Ireland? Or why did you set your book in India? Why did you set it in Australia? Nobody would ever ask that. But if you set it in the US, people get their feathers get ruffled. First thing I would say is, the people I have doing such horrible, horrible things, if I told you they were Canadian, you wouldn't believe it. And because we're just too nice. I mean, if we're going to kill somebody, we apologize afterwards for doing it. And so there's that. And the other part, I guess, frankly, is, when I started, Canada has a very rich tradition of literary fiction, and rightly so. And for a long time, I think, was not as interested in publishing crime fiction. And I wrote 7 novels before I got a Canadian publisher. I wrote this crime novel, we gave it to everybody, and everybody up here passed, and Bantam in New York published it. So to some degree, it was you dance with the one what brung you. The other thing too is, I don't think, and I mean, some of my novels have had a lot to do with severe economies and sort of the social and kind of social conditions that have bred criminal behavior that I think are slightly more extreme and more of a problem in the US than they are here. And that was also to some degree a part of it. I mean, and the settings in most of my books are very a lot of them are very kind of suburban. And whereas, you have someone like Louise Pennyworth, which the setting is so distinctly Canadian, or Giles Blunt, his books. So that's kind of the long-winded answer about why most of my books are in the US. The 4 Zach novels that I wrote never specified where they took place, but in my head they were in the Oakville and Toronto.
So you should be thankful that they're not in Canada and you're not getting inspiration for all your...
You don't want these kind of people up here who are these terrible, terrible people. You don't want people sabotaging elevators in Toronto. You want them to do it in New York.
I agree.
And I should add too, that this first 7 books I didn't, but I have since then had wonderful Canadian publishers who have been amazingly supportive and so forth.
When an anonymous person asks, she said, you said you were friends with Ian Rankin. Do you have other authors you are friendly with?
Yeah, well, a lot of them. I have one of the great things about doing this and going to events and so forth is that I have become friends and gotten to know, Ian Rankin and Peter James and Michael Robotham and Sherry LaPena is a good friend. We had the same agent, and Claire McIntosh and Stephen King is, someone that I'm as back and forth with in emails as recently as last week. So, so that's been one of the joys of this. I mean, looking at the shelf, who do I know? Like a lot of these people have become friends over the years. And when writers get together, they usually don't talk that much about writing. They just complain about tours and other things and the hell that is their lives. That's pretty much what they talk about.
Oh no.
I've got to do some fabulous events over the years to interview other authors or have them interview me. Like a couple times I've interviewed Carl Hyacin, whose work I just adore. I did interview one night James Elroy. That was a night to remember. And so, it's a lot of fun to meet people, in many cases, people that you have been fans of for years. Like I did an event a few weeks ago with Robert Crace over online, who writes the Ellis Cole novels, and people whose work you've been reading for a long time.
Yeah, no, I understand that completely. I mean, it's lots of fun. And one of the great things about being in libraries is that you do get to meet some
Absolutely.
amazing authors. So thank you for coming. Um, we had someone who we have lots of kind of longtime fans who've been with you for a while. I don't know if you can see the Q&As. We had someone who said, I love your column, and related it to my kids as they were the same age. And I always wondered how they turned out. We have other people who've been um, with you, from someone who said, what attracts you to short books about current politics? Because they remember your Mike Harris book.
Yeah, I did. Well, when I wrote the column for the Star, I would say about a third of them were sort of just funny domestic things happen on the home front. And then another third were just based on current events, and at least a third of them were sort of on politics. And I was not a huge fan of Mr. Harris. And I did a book about him called Mike Harris Made Me Eat My Dog. Then, in fact, it was the publisher that did that book is the one that came after me and said, would you do a Doug Ford book? And so, but that was great fun. I really loved doing the column. And I'm grateful to the Star forever that, that they gave me that opportunity. It was a lot of fun. Like I say, I always thought of it as kind of a 600-word political cartoon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kim Davis also says she started reading your column by accident in the Star when she was in college, and it was so funny that she kept reading it, and she was really disappointed when you left, but now you're writing thrillers and she loves them. So
and I say that a lot of times now, like I spend a lot of time, far too much time on Twitter, and if something strikes me as funny or something that I would have done a column on, I'll do it as a tweet in 268 characters, which tells me that the columns must have been way overwritten.
Oh no. Maybe this will help. Lorna has a question. She says, with the advent of the internet over the course of your writing career, has it influenced the way that you've written or investigated?
Well, it's certainly been a great research aid, I must say, because you can generally find the answer to an awful lot of little questions, right? I mean, you can be sitting at the computer and you think, say you want to say somebody had a drink of Kool-Aid, and you think, is that hyphen capital A? Is like, well, how do you spell Kool-Aid? So you just, I don't have to go to the store and look at the package. I could just look it up. So it's a great help for that. And then, when I do a book like Trust Your Eyes, which was about a map-obsessed individual who spends all of his time on a Google Street View type site, and I thought, if you're writing something about, I mean, it's always better to go in person, first of all, but let's say that's not possible. And you think, well, what does it look like on this particular street in this particular town in Dublin? I can just go there and see it. So the internet's been very helpful in that way to sort of check things in quickly. And of course, this year it's been tremendously helpful because there are no book tours because of COVID, and I can talk to you and everybody tonight, which is also a bonus.
Yeah, it's great because we have people from all over Muskoka and beyond. So
exactly.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is going to be our last question because we're getting pretty close to 8 o'clock.
Right.
But this is actually about the book. So we'll bring it back to the book, which you can purchase from the library, or you can borrow it from the library eventually. And Jackie asks, there was an interesting component on the 3rd floor of Jeremy's house. How did you come up with that? But no spoilers.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about it because it's early in the book. We learned that, first of all, our character, Jeremy Pritkin, is this extremely wealthy and somewhat eccentric individual who's made millions and millions of dollars in the highway industry, building highways and all that kind of thing. And as a youngster, his parents would take trips in motorhomes, in RVs, Winnebago type things. And so now he has this massive, immense brownstone in Manhattan and a big office on the 3rd floor. And because he thinks it'd be kind of cool and kitschy, he has installed into the 3rd floor a small Winnebago, which he uses as kind of an office. And the idea for that came from a couple places. One time years ago, I saw this photo layout for someone who had this really cool loft. And in it, they had installed an Airstream, that iconic American travel trailer made of, stainless steel or aluminum, whatever, and used it as an office within this loft. And I thought it was so kitschy and so neat. And of course, through my teens, I ran a trailer park near Bob Cajun, basically ran it after my father died when I was 16. So there's always been this sort of soft spot in my heart for those. So I thought this character would do just this sort of eccentric oddball thing. And so he hires a big crane operator, and they bring out the window from the 3rd floor, and they push this RV right into the 3rd floor of his brownstone. So he's a bit eccentric, this guy, but I think it's a very cool idea. And who knows, this RV's appearance at the beginning of the book, this might be a setup for something later. You never know.
All right, well, you'll have to read the book and find out. So find you first. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you, and I know that a lot of people have enjoyed it, but it's 8 o'clock, so we have to say goodbye. So thank you so much, everyone. Don't forget to sign up for your library newsletter or follow us on social media so you can find out about the next author event. Check out Linwood Barclay's website, because you have a lot of TV and movie recommendations on there as well, and lots of other cool stuff.
Thanks.
So thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody.